SQL Loader data types. SQL Loader has specific restrictions and capabilities for data types. The different data types are namely strings in general, dates in general, numbers, and various other very explicit and specific data types such as those dealing with objects and binary objects. I'm not going to worry about those for now. Let's look at strings. There are two basic string types, a char and a varchar, and you can specify a size. All the size does really is specifies a maximum size. If you do not know the size of strings, do not specify sizes at all, and any size will be placed in. The only difference between a char and a varchar is that a char will always be a specific length, even though it's not specified, which it doesn't really make sense why you have varchar and char variables in SQL Loader. Namely, this is probably to match with the table restrictions within a table in the database. With respect to SQL Loader and variable length strings delimited by predefined values determined, for instance, by an enclosed by a statement, it doesn't really make much difference. Dates. You can have dates, times, timestamps, etc. Obviously applying date and time format masks. Various other date type fields which are a little bit too involved at this stage. Numbers can get fairly complicated. Generally, I just stick to integers and floats. I usually use external definitions to allow the definition of the number to be defined by the value in the data file. In my experience, placing too many restrictions in SQL Loader control files leads to problems. All you're trying to do is load data. If you're going to wash the data during the process of loading with SQL Loader, it is possible that you're going to have performance issues. Generally, SQL Loader is used to load data very rapidly. Obviously, if you're importing the data using SQL Loader and you're expecting to get thoroughly washed data, in other words, everything is correct, the fields are all the right lengths, any roundings are done or any formatting, any strings are chopped or trimmed or padded, then obviously you need to do the processing with SQL Loader. So an external number is really defined by the length and structure of the number loaded. As I said, generally I just use integers or floats. A floating point, a decimal, really defines the size of the decimal. In other words, where the decimal point goes, a float does not. A float is really a floating point number. The point can be anywhere within the number. In the case of numbers, using a default if statement will set the value to a 0 since it's a numeric field. So in the case of numbers, setting default if column A is blank. In other words, if column A has nothing in it, it sets it to the default value, which is 0. If column A has nothing in it, it sets it to a null value. In this case, you're actually going to replace the number value with a null. Sometimes it may be expedient to replace the type of that column with a char, depending on what you're doing, how you're loading data, what you're doing with it, what you're doing it for, etc., etc. This is not necessarily true. Non-external values really provides more explicit typecasting of data types, and really we've got certain types, integers with certain length, small integers, floats, double precision, byte integers, very small integers, decimals with specific size, and various others. I prefer to use external values and determine the scope of a number based on the value being imported. Unless you need very specific restrictions, don't bother with these types of number data types. When importing data using SQL Loader, in my experience, data coming from another source or imported directly from the operating system always has problems. If you're going to wash data, either do it externally with scripting in the operating system or internally within the database. It's much faster. As I said before, if you're going to wash data to a certain extent with SQL Loader, it tends to negate the usefulness of SQL Loader, and really you're just adding an extra step.